Now, I know I made a video not that long ago bemoaning the lack of character deaths in Bleach, specifically calling out Byakuya Kuchiki as a character that absolutely should have died in the final arc. By the way, you should go and check that video out. I highly recommend it. It's a good watch. But that doesn't mean that characters don't die in this series. They just happen to mostly be bad guys. However, Kubo does know how to write a real tearjerker of a death scene, and some of them have some real emotional impact. In this video, I want to look at my top 5 favourite death scenes in this series, covering all of the arcs. The criteria for this is pretty simple. We're going to be looking at how emotionally impactful these death scenes were, how beautifully drawn they were in the anime or the manga, and how much justice they did to the character in general, or the importance they had on the plot. Before we begin though guys, my analytics tell me that 2/3 of you guys who are watching my content aren't currently subscribed. So if you could hit that button and help us reach 1,000, it would be really, really appreciated. So before we hit number 5, let's start with an honourable mention, and I think you probably know what's coming. Yes, Byakuya Kuchiki's death scene is my honourable mention, because quite frankly, if he had actually died, it would probably be number 1 on this list. The scene itself is incredibly well written, fantastically drawn in the manga, and yeah, even though it spans a couple of chapters, it's really, really well done. Byakuya's final moments where he gets defeated by Asnot, then where his sword breaks and he apologises to Rukia and Renji, then you get the moment when Ichigo arrives and they have one of my favourite scenes in the series where just everything comes full circle between these two characters who we've known since the start of the franchise. It's a really, really impactful scene. You've got the rain in Seirete, which, by the way, I think, as long as I am not messing this up, is the first time we've ever seen it rain in the manga in Seirete, which is really, really cool. Just that whole finale of that invasion is fantastically well done, and Byakuya's death is the kind of the cherry on top, and the fact that he doesn't die definitely takes away from that moment. And as I said earlier, I did a whole video on this topic where I kind of presented my reasoning for why I thought he should have died. Just know that if he had died, it probably would be my favourite death scene in the series. It was that well done. But unfortunately, because he didn't, it's an honourable mention, as it's not technically a death scene. Starting in at number 5 then, my 5th favourite death scene in the entire series is that of Sternritter D, Askin Naklavar. In chapter 665, he's battling Urahara Kisuke. Urahara's finally activated his long-awaited Bankai Kanon Biraki Benahime Aratame, and finally, we're having a really good fight between these two. It's pretty evenly matched, except Askin is poisoning Urahara all the time by changing the concentration of poison in the air in his Gift Ball Deluxe. But there's one thing Askin has missed. Urahara has used his Bankai to create an opening in the Gift Ball and allowed someone to sneak into the battlefield behind Askin. Yes, it turns out that Grimjo is actually back on his feet, and he punches through Askin's back and quite literally rips out his heart before Askin can even realise. Yes, it's brutal, but that's part of the appeal. This battle ends like almost no other fight in the franchise. Askin is quite literally outsmarted, and he's just completely taken out in one hit, and I loved it. I thought it was completely out of nowhere. I thought it was just brutally straightforward for a franchise that loves to drag out its fights with transformation after transformation. You also have to remember that this death actually fits Askin quite well. Because of his ability, the death dealing, and his general lethargy towards life, he's always kind of considered himself to be too far from death's door to ever really feel death approaching him. He's always kind of felt like he's immune to dying because of his abilities. So literally having his heart pulled out, and it's pretty much the last thing he ever sees, is very fitting for a character who pretty much felt he was invincible in that regard. It's also nice because it's all very in character. Urahara just outsmarts Askin, he doesn't completely overpower him, and it all makes sense. Askin drops the hints earlier on. He says that the Gift Ball Deluxe is inescapable. Urahara cleverly deduces that he doesn't mention that it is not impenetrable, so he creates a little gap for Grimjo to come in, and then you get a nice bit of payoff between Grimjo and Askin after obviously Askin defeated him earlier in the arc. It's just a really, really good death scene. Like I said, it comes out of nowhere, and it's just so completely unlike any of the other death scenes, especially around this moment in the story when the villains were just living for ages and ages. There are a couple of other things that make this really stand out to me. One is that this is the end of Askin. He doesn't come back to life, and I think that's really refreshing. Most of the villains at this point were demigods. They were almost like angels who couldn't be killed. But no, Askin is just a pretty regular dude. He's taken out. But it's also not the end, because he does get the last laugh, in a sense. The fact that he's dying means that his Gift Ball Deluxe is going to go haywire and take the others with him. But what I really, really like about this final moment for this character is that he doesn't want to kill them. You know, he's lying on the ground, completely helpless, without a heart, and the last thing he says to Urahara is that he would love to spare him out of respect for his character, but he physically can't do it. He doesn't have the strength to hold off the gift ball any longer. I think that is just a fantastic character moment in what is a string of fantastic character moments for this character. And again, I have to compare him to the other Quincy's around this moment. Most of them are ranting, raving lunatics that just can't possibly ever accept a Shinigami killing them. But no, Askin lying on the floor is just like, yeah, I've lost, and I'd love to save you, but I can't. But he even says that he thinks Urahara can figure out a way of getting out of it regardless. It's a fantastic death scene. Sure, I would have loved the fight to be in a little bit longer, but I can't argue with the way it ends. I thought it was fantastic. Number 4 then is a little more downbeat than Askin's death for sure, and this one is Ginjo Kugo in the Lost Agent arc. Now, I know that Ginjo is absolutely not the most popular character in this series, but I really do think that Kubo liked this guy a lot. And you know what, so did I. I thought he was pretty well written, and I think the only thing we needed from him was more backstory, more context as to who he was. But his relationship with Ichigo was pretty much the foundation for this entire arc, and it builds and builds and builds until the moment he betrays Ichigo, and we get to see what he's really like. We then get to learn a little bit about his motivations, the fact that he thinks Soul Society betrayed him, and that he really wanted Ichigo to go down the same path as him, but Ichigo obviously makes the choice not to, and their choices diverge, and there's no other option but to fight. And I think the end of this battle is written incredibly well, because Ichigo is clearly not happy about the fact that he's defeated him. This is also, by the way, Ichigo's first ever kill in the series, if you don't include Ulquiorra, because he was killed by Hollow Ichigo. So I think it's an incredibly well done moment. I think it's better in the manga, personally, because you get to see every agonizing step that Ginjo tries to take to get back on his feet, only to collapse on the ground again. It's incredibly well drawn. Every moment where he gets on his knees, but the blood is still coming out of him and he just collapses to the floor, is fantastic. And it's capped off with the moment where Ichigo is looking down on him, and Ginjo wonders if Ichigo had come first, would their positions be reversed? Would Ichigo have made the same bad choices in life that Ginjo did? And would Ginjo be the bright-eyed, noble substitute Shinigami that Ichigo is? It's one of those things that's impossible to know the answer to, except for the fact that we know these two characters, and based on what we know of Ichigo and the way he dealt with finding out about the Soul Society's betrayal, he probably wouldn't have gone down the same path as Ginjo. And I think it's just a really good, really thought-provoking death for a major villain. It's just a really quiet death. It's really unusual for Bleach. He literally just dies on the floor. You see his eyes changing colour and stuff. And in the manga, it's done fantastically in the anime. Don't get me wrong, it is beautiful in the anime. The soundtrack is absolutely on point. But in the manga, I just love the extra attention to detail, the extra steps we get to see through all the different panels. Fantastically well done. And the third best death scene, in my opinion, is that of Gein Ichimaru. This fan-favourite character, his days were always probably numbered because of his, again, a bit like Ginjo, terrible choices in life. But Gein has appeared to be a villain for pretty much the entire series, and he is still a bad guy. The fact that he wants to kill Aizen doesn't change that. It doesn't change the fact that he attempts to kill Hiyori. It doesn't change the fact that he brutally torments Rukia for no real reason other than the fact that he's a bit of a psycho. The fact that he wants to kill Aizen doesn't absolve him of those sins, but his final moments are really quite eye-opening for this character. So as we know, when Aizen's this close to completing his plan, Gein turns on him and attempts to kill him. It's a pretty dumb move, all things considered. When you consider that Gein is the closest person to Aizen for the entire series, why didn't he just kill Aizen when Aizen was not almost a god? Doesn't make any sense, but it's still a cool move for the plot nonetheless, and it's well executed as well. It's cool seeing the true power of Gein's Bankai. It's cool seeing him relate himself to a snake in more ways than one. And then, of course, you have the emotional aspect because Matsumoto is there. She's crying over the fact that he's basically at death's door. I know a lot of people have, over the years, been very unhappy with the fact that Gein was killed so quote-unquote easily by Aizen, but I have to remind you that Gein actually does take a lot of hits before he goes down. Aizen rips off his arm, cuts him across the chest, and then stabs him in the gut. And I know that for Bleach that's not necessarily enough to kill someone, but Aizen at this point was, like I said, almost a god. So it makes a lot of sense that Gein doesn't come back from that. But obviously the absolute pinnacle of this moment is when Ichigo arrives, and we get to see the payoff from their earlier encounter. So during the fight with Ichigo and Gein back in the Fate Karakura Town arc, Gein is acting very weirdly. And at this point we don't know that he's going to betray Aizen, even though I think it was probably the most predicted outcome for a lot of people. Gein is clearly testing Ichigo, and Ichigo is failing at every step. He's weak, he's got no resolve, he doesn't even want to fight Gein, and again Gein's like, what are you doing? You know, you should be more prepared than this, but Ichigo is terrified of Aizen at this point. So when Ichigo arrives from his training with Isshin, ready for the final battle of this arc, and his eyes have changed, no words are exchanged between the two characters, but it's fantastically drawn. Again, I think it's phenomenally done in the anime. The music, of course, is incredible at this point. I think it's Chokaku is the OST playing, and it's fantastically well done. But I just love how Gein is drawn in the manga. I'm a manga purist at the end of the day. The way he's lying on his last legs on the floor, but he manages to open his eyes and look at Ichigo, and he says, oh yeah, those eyes are better. Now I can die and leave this in your hands. Those final lines for Gein are amazingly well done, and we know it leads to the biggest beatdown in the series when Ichigo just absolutely lays waste to Aizen. So it's a fantastically well done death. It's emotional, and I know a lot of people think that Gein was kind of underused, and that's probably true, considering he was such a favourite character, but I think his death definitely did him justice. I think it was really well done. Number 2 on this list is a pretty big one, and again, I think most people probably saw this coming, but it's from the final arc of the series, when Yamamoto is killed by Yuha. And this was a just mind-blowing moment for me and a lot of other people in reading the manga on a weekly basis, because up until this point, no hero had died. We thought Byakuya was dead at this point, but it's pretty clear that Yamamoto dies. There was no room for judgment here. He definitely dies. So obviously, we finally get to see Yamamoto's Bankai. You have to take context into this as well. The Quincy have invaded the Seirei, everything is going to hell, it's really not looking good for our heroes, but Yamamoto kind of pulls it back. He injects a much-needed dose of morale into the Shinigami, and they all start fighting back. Until Yamamoto expends all his energy, and it turns out that it was all for nothing, because the real Yuha was actually not here, and Yamamoto was fighting a fake. When Yuha arrives, he just completely defeats Yamamoto, there's no question about it. He steals his Bankai, then cuts him in half. It's a very brutal scene, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how they do it in the anime. I think we'll get one of those moments where the screen goes red, and it will just be Yama's silhouette, and he'll, like, split in half. I think that's probably what they're going to do, because I'll be amazed if they actually do it like they do it in the manga, where his body literally falls apart, but I don't think that's going to happen. Anyway, so yeah, Yuha, in a stunning display of brutality for a Bleach villain, just cuts him in half, steps on his head. So Yamamoto, in like his last moment, the top half of his body tries to like grab Yuha's cape very feebly, and Yuha just cuts his arm off, then steps on his head, and it's like, oh my god, this is mad. Yamamoto, as you probably know, of course, is like the symbol of power in the Bleach universe, being the oldest, most powerful Shinigami we've seen up until this point, who is almost unquestionably the most powerful character. You know, every time he fights anyone, it's nearly a one-hit kill. Whether that was Aeon, whether that was the Tresbestius, even against Wonder Ice, when he had no Zanpakuto, Toe, he kills him in one chapter. It doesn't take any effort whatsoever. He one-shots Driscoll. For him to be utterly annihilated like this, humiliated and reduced to literal atoms after Yuha blows him apart, is crazy. And then there's the emotional side of things as well. I know that not a lot of people really cared about Yamamoto. You know, he was gruff, he was an authoritarian, we never really got to know him that well. But we do care about Kyoraku and Ukitake, and the fact that they lose their father figure, and both of them freak out when they discover that he's dead, is pretty rough, and that's obviously Soul Society's lowest point as well. Chapter 511 is when the Shinigami really start to lose that fight, and the Quincy just decimate Soul Society, and it's mad. It's a crazy moment that I think Kubo handled very well. And I think were it not for that moment, I think Byakuya's non-death would have hit even worse, and the whole first invasion would have just been, well, not for nothing, but it would have just meant a lot less. The fact that it ends with Yamamoto's utter humiliation and death does a lot for that early section of the story. So yeah, I think Yamamoto death is easily one of the best in the series, just because it's so brutal, so unforgiving and relentless. It's like nothing else in the series, and it is a crazy read. So that's my number 2 pick. Before I unveil my number 1 slot, which I think a lot of you probably can guess what it is at this point, I just want to reiterate, guys, if you hit that subscribe button, I would really, really appreciate the support. We are almost at 1,000 subs, and it's just the momentum has been absolutely incredible to see. So if you can hit that button, I would really, really appreciate it. And the number 1 death scene in Bleach, in my opinion, is the 4th Espada, Ulquiorra. Ichigo versus Ulquiorra is probably the best fight in the series, and that whole dome mini-arc, as the fans have kind of taken to calling it, is one of the darkest points in the series, especially in an arc that's not really known for being that dark. The Aranka arc is quite light-hearted for the most part, but the dome is very different. You know, there's no comedy to be seen anywhere. It's a literal battle between demons. You know, Ichigo's hollow form comes out and it's monstrous. Ulquiorra's Segunda Etapa is monstrous. It's all very dark. You know, on top of the dome is almost pitch black. Ichigo dies. He literally dies. He gets his neck broken and then is just a hole blown through him. And it's just a monstrous time, but it's a phenomenal read. And like, Kubo does that very well. The dome stuff is handled phenomenally, and Ulquiorra's death is the icing on the cake. When Ichigo finally regains his senses, thanks to Ulquiorra, who cuts off his horn, he has to basically watch as Ulquiorra turns to dust before his eyes. And I know a lot of people, I remember reading this weekly, a lot of people weren't particularly happy with how Ichigo was portrayed in this moment, you know, complaining about how he didn't want to win this way, and kind of being seen as almost like whiny. But I don't think it really matters. The focus of this is not on Ichigo at all. It's on Ulquiorra, the culmination of his character arc and his relationship with Orihime. So obviously he was her tormentor for a long time, and as he is turning to dust before their eyes, you know, he claims to have finally understood what a human heart is, and it's this thing that he metaphorically is holding in his hand, which he then outstretches to Orihime, and he says, you know, "Are you afraid of me?" And she, for the first time, says no, holds out her hand, but his hand turns to dust before anything else can happen. And it is one of those moments where I was on the edge of my seat, like, I cannot believe this is happening. Obviously, I kind of assumed that Ulquiorra would die at some point because he's a major villain, but I think I just didn't expect it to be so emotionally charged. You know, it was really, really surprising. Ulquiorra does not get the most character development in the series, but that's kind of the point. He's supposed to be a robotic, statuesque monster of a character who doesn't understand emotion, but at the end he kind of finally does, and it's a really, really well done moment that I think encapsulates everything that Bleach is about. At the end of the day, it's about the bonds of friendship between people, and characters like Ulquiorra, who don't understand that, are often portrayed as some of the biggest villains in the series, and I just think his death is incredibly well done. And as far as I remember, it was voted the most impactful death in manga in the year of its release, and I think it completely makes sense. You know, Ulquiorra was an absolute fan favourite character, and after a brutal, long, demonic battle, he dies in the most quiet way possible. I think it was really, really, I think it really subverted the expectations that people had for the end of that fight, and I think just Bleach in general. It kind of showed us that, you know, it was capable of something more. I think that was really, really just a phenomenal death scene for a phenomenal character after a phenomenal battle. And that's it for my top 5 death scenes in Bleach, guys. Let me know what you think. There are obviously other great death scenes in the franchise. I was tossing up using Bazby or Cayenne or Neutra, other things like that I really, really enjoyed as well. But these 5 ended up being the ones that I thought were the absolute pinnacle of the series and showcased the versatility in these characters' death scenes as well. You have Askin's, which is a less typical death scene and kind of comes out of nowhere, compared to, say, Yamamoto's, which is an exercise in brutality and the gore in Bleach, and then Ulquiorra's, which is a quiet death, which is really very unlike anything else in the series. That's it from me though, guys. Drop a comment if you like this video, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.